I'm going to talk about teaching students rather than subjects, and I'd like to tell you who am I, because how my teaching evolved is related to how it all began. I'm a physician, a doctor, a gynecologist. I've practiced medicine for 12 years, and then I moved into education, and I became addicted to it. And how I started was, as soon as I moved into education, I was so excited about enriching my students with all that information I had, and I wanted to bring my medical background into teaching biology. I was so eager to teach them, and I just wanted to make the lessons so special because of all I had to say and add and the insight I wanted to give them. I wanted to enrich their experience. So I was eager to cover the material and go beyond. And as any teacher starts, you need to cover the curriculum, do it the best way possible. And then I was eager to take it a step further, take them into the medical field and give them background. And then my teaching changed over time. As you get to teach year after year, things progress and you realize it's not about the syllabus, it's about the student. And it's not just giving them a curriculum, it's about a whole worldly experience that we're all talking on the same page, but it seems we're just talking about different paragraphs on the same page. So when I started teaching, I realized that I was making a huge mistake by assuming that the students knew things from other classes. I assumed that they knew English. I assumed that they'd taken chemistry and they understood what they've taken in the chemistry class. I was assuming they understood terms that were common between different sciences, and that's a huge mistake. When you assume things about the students, you're starting off on the wrong foot. I don't know how many of you have experienced that in a classroom. You're just eager to move ahead without checking where the students are coming from. What are they bringing into the class from their other subjects? So you encounter all those interesting comments from the students, and the most interesting one, the spelling count. And I was, what? Spelling always counts. And when you tell them that, the amazing response was, but this is a biology class. Why would spelling count? And like you'd wonder, how can spelling not count? And like if you know your spelling, why are you going to mess it up in a biology class? Why would you mess it up in a chemistry class? Of course it counts. And then the next point is, am I going to lose marks for the wrong spelling? And like, my God, all the wrong spelling I get now, I don't have a feel. When I see a word, I don't know if it's right or wrong anymore. Is the T before the H or the H before the T? I don't know. In the past, I could actually look at a word and say, oh, it's not spelled correctly. But the number of wrong spelling, I think I see more wrong spelling than correct spelling. So I try to introduce them to the concept that a letter makes a difference, and the spelling changes the word. So, can you guess what was I teaching when I got all those different variants? In biology, where were we when we got those peak and peak and beak and beaker? We were talking about birds, believe it or not. And this is what you get. Yes? The number of times I got birds have beakers. I was very jealous of the chemistry teachers. Obviously, they're having a strong impact on my students. But I had all different forms, and trying to get them to understand that a letter makes a difference. And when you change a letter, you can change a word. It's huge. I'm not trying to intrude on the English language, but I mean, like, come on, a letter makes a difference. And you get that. I always tell them cat, hat, mat, fat, bat, sat. You change words from adjectives, nouns, verbs, just by changing one letter. So they have to be aware that a letter makes a huge difference. Not only in the English language, but also makes a difference for us in biology. And so when I started to teach biology in depth and catering to the needs of my students, I try to bring in why language counts, why spelling counts, and English isn't just about the English teachers anymore. So I bring that when I'm talking about DNA. And I try to introduce them to the fact that letters make a difference. When you change one letter in the DNA, this is a completely different gene, a completely different condition. We get diseases just because one letter has been changed in our DNA. That's huge. Spelling counts because obviously students are used to just spelling words with just the common letters. So I put an M and an I and a T and it's going to work out. So sometimes when they're stuck and they don't know which is which, they try to make a cocktail, a mixture of all the letters, and just you find your way around. If it's mitosis or meiosis, the M is there, you'll find your way around. You know all those posts where they tell you if you can read the first letter and the last letter, you know, you'll work out what's in between. And this is how my students actually spell most of the time. So trying to get them to understand that mitosis is not meiosis, and the examiner is going to treat both the same, and you're not just going to give me letters and I'm going to unravel them on my own. It's not going to work that way. So yes, ureter, urethra, urea, urine. If any of you are familiar with the biology course, a letter makes a difference. So just having a U and an R isn't going to cut it out. For glycogen, glucagon, and glycerol, just having G and L and Y is not going to cut it out. And the number of students who just can't be bothered to learn the spelling, can't see the importance and the significance of a letter, it is huge. And I've been teaching for 16 years, and every year I get that question: does spelling count? Will I be penalized for the spelling? And I tell them they will be. They will be penalized. And I do my best to penalize them as much as I can, trying to get things in order. But the problem is, it's not about the English language, is it? It's not just who's responsible for that. So you try to bring in some background. It's not just the English teacher who's going to teach them the English and the sciences, the English and the math. So I've learned over the years to try and widen their scope and go back to the first level. And believe it or not, I never thought I would be doing that, but I go back and see where the words originally came from, the Greek origins, the Latin origins, and I try to explain what those are and what they mean in the original language. And then from there, when the students understand that, life becomes a lot easier. For example, when we talk about mono, di, and tri, once you explain to them that mono means one and di, two, and tri, and poly, then when we talk about biological molecules, when we move into advanced levels, they can find their way. They can find their bearings by moving from large molecules to smaller molecules just by working out where it all started. And it is fascinating because in the beginning, I just used to teach them, this is called monosaccharide 1, this is disaccharide 2, blah, blah, blah. But when I got to introduce them that mono, di, tri, poly, and then when I start teaching, they can figure it out on their own. So I tell them, okay, so what if we stick two monos together? And they go, oh, it becomes di. What if we stick plenty together? And they can figure it out. So it was fascinating because at the beginning when I started teaching, I was so eager to cover the material, I just gave it to them. But when I started to develop a better technique of teaching them where it all came from, they can figure it out on their own. And definitely we go further, and it stays with them. It really stays with them. They figure it out on their own. So for example, photo, when we talk about photosynthesis, they have a problem with the spelling. It's so long, they don't know what it's about. But when you introduce to them what photo means, light, and they tell you photograph, and they realize that a photograph is a reflection of the light, a graphing of the light, then things start becoming different. Then they bring into the class, oh, you mean photo? Oh, no wonder photocell in physics. No wonder photoelectric energy. And it all comes in. So I'm not just teaching them the biology. I'm teaching them the origins of the words. And they're taking that into their other sciences. So it's not a matter of the English for the English teacher and the math for the math teacher. It's not the way it should be working for the students. You see a lot of that in different subjects, especially with math. We always assume that students know how to calculate things. And when they don't, you just wonder what the math teachers are doing. You don't know how to do graphs? What's wrong with you? You don't know how to calculate percentages? Duh. And then it struck me, it was amazing because you'd have those students who are studying A-level, scoring A's and stars in their A-level, and they come to a biology class where they can't figure out how to do a scale for a graph, or they can't calculate percentage increase or decrease. And that was shocking. And I thought, what's wrong with my students? It's just my students. I always end up with those students. And then I talked to other teachers No, it's not just my students. Oh, it must be the students in our country. And then thanks to the Cambridge panel, we started talking together across the countries, across the borders, and we suddenly became aware that it's not a national problem, it's an international problem, that students put subjects into compartments. So they think the math is for the math class where they get their minds all worked up, their calculators out, and then in a biology class, once they get 10 times 2 divided by 3, and I need to get my calculator, I can't do this on my own. And that's shocking, but true. They put subjects into compartments, and that's a problem for us. When you're teaching a science, when you're teaching math, when you're teaching geography, but at the end of the day, it's a problem for the student because he's not learning for himself. He's not getting an education. He's putting math in the math compartment. He'll get to that when he's in a math class. He'll take biology in the biology compartment, put it in that locker, and once the year is over, let's close the key and throw it away. That's not an education. He's just passing an exam, passing on to the next level. And because of the way we're teaching it and the way he's receiving it is that each subject is in isolation from the others. So you get math and geography, everything in its own place, in its own compartment. Biology teachers aren't supposed to talk about rivers. H2O is something to do with chemistry. No, we talk about everything. We bring biology into everything. We talk from biology, we move on to geography, we move into chemistry. We move on to English, and we talk about spelling. We have to overcome this problem. We have to make the student think. It's not thinking out of the box. It's just connecting all those compartments together, where they can just stick in the compartment for physics and get out kinetic energy and use it for biology. Stick in chemical reactions and get it into biology. From biology, use diffusion and use that in chemistry. We have to try and get the students to stop putting subjects into compartments. So the math skills, the units, I don't know if any of you have worked with students who are trying to convert from one unit to the other at an older age. They do have problems. And sometimes the scary thing, they'll tell you, okay, so I'm changing from millimeters to micrometers. Is that when I multiply by 1,000 or divide by 1,000? And that's because they're just trying to memorize. They're not thinking, am I moving from the bigger unit to the smaller unit? They're not thinking. They're just trying to memorize. So they know it's multiplied by 1,000 or divided, but he can't figure out which way because he's not thinking about it. He's just trying to recall. That's the problem. Percentages, this is a talent and a skill that we use in all the different sciences, not just math. And yet they do have a problem. Once they leave the math class, they have a problem with that. Graphs, huge, huge issue, working out the scales. I couldn't understand why students are having problems working out scales in a graph when they're in A-level math. And every year I tell my students, I don't understand, why are you having problems with scales? Until one of my students was very kind enough to answer. And she said, because in math, they give us the scales already made. We never have to work out the scales in math. And that was one huge eye-opener. I thought that they learned how to do scales. They didn't. Because in the math classes, they were given graphs with the scale, and they just had to plot their points. So I started working with the math teachers and discussing this with them. And we tried to work our way where we integrate the subjects together. So I tell her, when you're working on percentages, I will give you things from my biology class where you can work on percentages. So it's not just math problems they're doing. They're doing the math, but the problem itself is set as a biology problem, set as a chemistry problem. You're working percentages, but they can relate it to their other subjects. We started talking about graphs, and I said, okay, so let's combine the skills together. Don't give them the scale and let them develop the scale. This way, we're both achieving a better end. And once we started doing this, the graphing improved in all the 3 sciences because the students were putting math in a compartment, physics, chemistry, biology, each in its own. So once we started to integrate those subjects together, the skills, we started working on the student skills rather than the subject itself. We all did benefit. And of course, above all, the student did because he developed the skills for doing so. Algebra, you always hear the students saying, why are we learning X and Y? I never go to the grocery store and tell the guy how many X's or how many Y's is this. Why are you giving us algebra? So in biology, we have something in genetics called 2n and 1n when we want to refer to the number of chromosomes in a cell. So I tell them, okay, you always ask about algebra X and Y. Here we go. We're using 1n and 2n. Can someone tell me why we're using 1n and 2n? And then they start saying, oh, because here you have one set of chromosomes and in another set you have two. And I go, great. So what's the point of using n? And they sit and think about it and then tell me, of course, because n is going to vary from one species to the next. In this way, they never forget it for me in biology. And now algebra makes a bit more sense for them in their math class. So trying to integrate the different subjects has just helped us move ahead in all directions. Another example is using same term, different subjects. So for example, diffusion, they meet diffusion in chemistry, they meet diffusion in biology, and they meet it in physics, and yet the sciences are not tweaking their definitions to come together. So they actually memorize a definition in one subject and memorize another for another subject. Once you introduce them to actually what's happening, understanding what is happening in this process, things have changed because now they apply the same term, the same definition across the border to the same term, and they understand why this is diffusion, and in physics as well it is diffusion, because now they understand what they're talking about rather than sitting there and memorizing three different terms, three different definitions for one term. The same with kinetic energy. They find this in physics. They come in the biology class, we talk about kinetic energy. Chemistry, they talk about kinetic energy. So we started collaborating, the science department, the different teachers, when we're talking about these subjects at the very beginning, getting these tools out of the way, and then in each subject, when it comes up, we're referring to each other. So in physics, they're talking about kinetic energy in biology. In chemistry, they're talking about kinetic energy in physics. And the student is becoming all-rounded. It's not just kinetic energy in separate subjects, but it's kinetic energy as it is, per se. Catalysts, they find catalysts in chemistry. We have biological catalysts in biology. So again, same term in different subjects. We also have same concepts, but different terms. For example, in chemistry, they call it chemical reaction. In biology, we call the chemical reactions occurring in the cell's metabolism. In chemistry, they say synthesis when they're building bigger molecules. In biology, we call it anabolic reactions. Catabolic reactions, the opposite of synthesis. So once you start talking about those concepts in the different classes, once they understand what's actually happening, how a molecule is building up or dividing down, and becoming familiar with the different terms used for the same process, the student becomes more of an intellect. He understands the concepts and he can apply them from one class to the other, rather than having each concept isolated. And he can't correlate, and it just adds to more confusion. And he reverts to memorizing rather than understanding the subject. So thanks to the panel, the Cambridge panel, teachers started talking across the border, and we started realizing that it's not an isolated problem. And I suppose this is why just any opportunity one gets to mix and mingle with teachers, it's amazing, because the insight all the teachers share, it's amazing how the students are the same all over the world. And it's amazing how all the teachers, as Peter was saying, we all care, each in his own way, but when we collaborate, we can just make a bigger impact on the students and help them even more. So thanks to the Cambridge panel, we started talking about the problems with math, and they actually came up with an amazing solution. Now they have those amazing books about math in sciences, a book for math and biology, math and chemistry, and math and physics. And it's amazing and astounding how huge an issue it was for each one of us in their own compartment. So we were each subject in their own compartment suffering from a certain problem. But when we started talking about it, we realized it was an international problem, and Cambridge started doing something about it, and they really did help us with those amazing books where they're talking about the math and each science. And this way we can actually collaborate, not only each on his own, but all together. I had once a student who was struggling with physics class, but he was an artist. And then I was just wondering, what can I do with him? And then one day I told him, okay, I want you to draw every lesson we take. I want you to do a poster for us that reflects our lesson. And amazing results. We had posters in the classroom for every chapter. He understood his physics. He aced his physics exam. Until now, we're in contact, and I won't tell you how long ago that was. But amazing, amazing. He just moved, he moved 180 degrees from someone who hated the subject, doesn't understand it, doesn't care, and all of a sudden, he just understands all the topics and is keen to sit in class and listen so that he can actually express that in art form. To move ahead, we all need to change. If we're not going to change, we're not going to improve. We'll keep on getting the same results, and even worse. The way I've evolved in my teaching was because I see my students and their needs. So I didn't read it in books as much to start with, but the point is you see the needs of your student and you change a way to actually accommodate their needs. So if a teacher isn't changing, he has a serious problem. And this is why sometimes older teachers set in their ways tend to be hostile to younger ones, thinking they're coming out with all those fancy ideas, but that's not the case. Because now you have students with a very short attention span, being on all those apps and all that screen time, so you have to change yourself or else you're going to be left out as a teacher. It is time consuming, and the only way to do this is to collaborate together. And I was wondering if we're actually creating this compartmentalization in the way we're teaching, because even class teachers who teach all the subjects, they have a set table where they say, now I'm teaching math. Get out your math books. And the teacher puts on the math hat. And then put that away, and now we're teaching social studies. So I wonder if we are actually creating that compartmentalization in the early stages. It's our fault that we do that. Maybe if we work on the younger ages, integrating the different subjects together, maybe that will bring the students to be all-rounded and trying in any subject they take to bring in the different concepts from the different subjects. Maybe that's the case. Maybe we are contributing to that. But definitely it is an issue. And it's time-consuming, but it needs teachers to come on board once they see the results. Because it's very funny, you meet those teachers in the staff room, on the hallways, and we're all making jokes, or we're tired and depressed. Can you believe that? They can't make a scale. Oh my God, they couldn't change centimeters into kilometers. And we're just talking about it, frustrated, and yet we're not doing anything. But once you go out and reach to someone, how can we do something about it together? Then it becomes a different story. And it becomes less frustrating because it's not just you. You're not just having that problem on your own. And we are creating an answer to everyone. We're solving the issue for everyone across the border. I mean, students back home, they have this taboo about physics. They're not very fond of physics. And they all think we're not going to understand physics. So there was this year where I was teaching chemistry and physics, and the book was mixed. So we're working on those chapters, and they're having fun. And then I go, okay, so next term we're starting chemistry. What? Was that physics? Oh my God, like you should have told us. Why? Well, physics is hard. Was it? So they have these set ideas and theories, and they go into class, and sometimes I tell them physics is just a subject with a bad reputation because they come in with that notion that it's going to be difficult, and it turns out difficult. But when they take it not knowing what it is, it works out. So yeah, you're absolutely right, yeah. So in order to do that, though, we need to plan together. We need to find a way to reach out to each other. And as Peter said earlier, we have a problem. Teachers are overworked. They don't have the time. There are those that are resistant to change. And when you bring out these notions and these ideas, they just think either that you're daydreaming, oh, someone was sitting at a desk daydreaming of things just to give us more work, or they just refuse to think or attempt it because they think it's not going to work. It's not going to work out. You want more time out of me. But when you actually reach out to individuals, see how you can help them integrate whatever they need into your subject. And once they start seeing it working, you can actually create a cycle. It gets off like a snowball, but you have to start at some point. So you need your teachers to come on board. You need to convince them to try it out. Maybe just by, like we were talking right now, bringing art So talk to the art teacher and see what they can do. PE teacher, bring in the music teacher. Sometimes, wow, you should see how kids rap about elements. And they make songs and they just love it. And they remember everything because they made it into a song. So just bringing in different subjects.
Very important.
Yes, yes. And it gets it exciting for them rather than just sitting there with a hard copy and going, oh, no, no, no. Yes, yes, I know my elements, A, B, C. So trying to make it more fun for them, actually, by integrating and bringing in the different subjects, it makes it fun, actually. So English in all the subjects. And again, we need to work together, assess together. It will make our life easier, because if we work across the border, at the end, the student will actually become better off. So we should actually work on the why and how, why things are what they are, and how they are working, where they came from. And once you work on those basics with your students, you'll be astounded that they can actually project forward, take that, and they work out the what and when. When I started teaching, I used to target the what and when. So what's going to happen if we have a blocked vessel? What's going to happen when the person has a heart attack? And they would just sit there, blah, or they try to figure it out and it wouldn't work. But once I started explaining to them things from the scratch, how the vessels are working, how they're arranged, what is actually happening along the time, and then they come up with the problem. So what's going to happen when a vessel becomes blocked? And they ask the question and they come forward with the answer. And this is what really is education. This is what education is all about, to figure things out. So we want to teach them to figure their way around, to think for themselves, and we're just there to facilitate, just give them the tools to work their way around. So we're just giving them the tools and they will do the rest. And they do an amazing job. With the modern technology, they go out and they research, they come up with questions, and they go out and research those questions, and the results are astounding. You'll be surprised. Just give it a try. So we all agree language is a challenge in itself, definitely, and it's not just the English teacher's problem. It's everybody's problem. Language is a barrier. And if we were going to move ahead with our students, they need to overcome that barrier. And it's not the responsibility of the English teacher alone. It's everybody's responsibility. We also have cultural barriers that come with the barrier in the language. So sometimes students have a problem figuring out what is meant by the English they're reading, because the words, they understand each word separately, but the concept itself is strange to them. So again, part of teaching the language is the culture that comes with it, the background, the phrases. Compartmentalization is a problem. It is there. It is a fact. And in order to move ahead, we need to try and find a way to overcome that. And the only way we're going to do that is by collaborating together. So it is a problem. Know what the problem is and move ahead. And Pete was saying that in the earlier keynote presentation. We need to know what the problem is so we can address it and move ahead. As long as we ignore it and we don't admit that it's there, we're not going to move ahead. So working together across the curricula is the only way ahead if we're going to make a change in the long run. We are teaching for life. We are trying to relate everything we're teaching them to their life. And we want them to be a better person. We are teaching the student and not the subject. If we start with the administrators being on board, they bring in the heads of departments, and then the heads of departments working together, they can collaborate. They can see where we can have a certain topic crossing between chemistry and physics, or math and biology, or math and physics. And they can start setting, okay, this year, let's work on this point, the graphing with the math and the chemistry and physics. If we just work on one topic a year, or per term, we are going to move ahead, because automatically once they start working together in the different departments, it's going to feed up. It's just like a fire spreading out.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.